this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the Heart of Storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. This week's episode, I spoke with Dave Tonge, who is in the UK. We had a wonderful chat about using history, working with history and storytelling, and I found it to be a really great conversation that I could have kept going for ages with. It was really, really engaging and tapped into a lot of things that I've been wondering about, which is not really present where I live. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Dave Tonge. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Dave Tonge, who is in Norfolk in England. Hi Dave, it's lovely to have you here. Tell me about your journey into storytelling.
I think it's like most other storytellers. That I don't know about you, but it's one of the things you kind of fall into. I didn't have a great vocation for it. I know that sounds terrible, but that kind of developed later. I was a welder. Excuse me, that's my cuckoo clock. Come on, hurry up. Yeah, anyway. I was a welder for many years, and I hadn't done very well at school. I went back into education, what's called an access course at the City College here in Norwich, then on to university, and I was working for the museum service in Norfolk to fund my studies, and I just happened to meet a guy there. We were what were called collection interpreters, talking about the objects. But he let it be known quite secretly. He was slightly embarrassed for some reason that he was a storyteller. And I came back and I told my wife and said, I've met a man who tells stories for a living. I'd never heard of it. And before long, I was doing it too. We were working together, fusing history and story, working for English heritage and other heritage sites, museums, old castles, monastic sites, you name it. And it's gone on from there.
Wow. And so you obviously have an interest in history. Is that something you've always had?
Yeah, I have. I mean, and I don't know why. I'll be honest, I didn't really get on as well at school as I said. And the one subject I just had a passion for was history. So it was natural that I mean, to be honest, I kind of just ended up in welding just because I left school with no qualifications, and so I just had to find my way. But when it came to studying at Access, it was natural that I would then follow the earlier passion for history. And it's mainly because I had good teachers at school who really inspired me. The idea that in Tudor times people would sail off to far off unknown places for 3 years, it just blew my mind. And that's what hooked me, really. That and the kind of the poorer people, their struggles long ago as well.
Yeah. So do you have a period in history that you like the most, or is it generally everything?
It is a bit of everything, although I have to say I have a particular passion for the Tudor period, only because when I then went on to do an MA at university, I was studying the court records of Norwich, what's called the Mayor's Court, which controlled all aspects of 16th century Norwich. And I just kind of got so deep into the lives of everyday people in that. I was meeting all of these amazing people who only left their records because they ended up in the court for various reasons. And that kind of really infused me. So it was only natural that when I went into storytelling, again, I would burrow into what they call chapbooks and jest books, which were the first printed stories, that were being sold for a penny. So even poor people, even if they couldn't read, they could hear them being called out, read in ale houses and taverns. So yeah, that's my passion. The poorer folk, let's say, the common sort.
Yeah. What is it? I'm the same. I quite like the stories of the ordinary people, rather than royals. But what is it about it for you that you really love about the poorer people, the ordinary folks that are in not necessarily have their own stories, but are in the history books on the edges? You're not there.
I mean, it's just that they did. I think we assume that everyone long ago they doffed their cap and just did as they were told, but it's just not true. The idea that women kept a half at home and didn't speak their mind, it's a nonsense. I've
Yeah.
got so many beautiful court records of women saying outrageous things to various members of the watch and the constables, and again, that's reflected in the stories. The beautiful thing is, when I was first putting my first book of Tudor folk tales together, I actively fused my earlier research into the court records with the stories because they really match. I was
Mm.
meeting vocal women in stories as I was in the court records. And again, it's just that independence, that fierceness that you see in these people that we just don't appreciate they had. They did have a voice and
Yeah.
said what they.
Well, I've got your medieval book, and one of my favorites is the fart story. No, is it? No, you've got not the fart story, but yeah, the monk. I think it's the monk who lets off a
Oh, yes,
fart. It's,
the classic. Chaucer's a classic thing, isn't he? Because Geoffrey Chaucer, that's one of his, I say one of his stories, but one he reworked like they did, from older stories. And again, at school, I would have never been interested in Chaucer because I assumed it was kind of elite stuff for folk up there. But of course, actually, Chaucer was writing for everyone. And so whilst he writes chivalric stories of kings and queens and such, he also writes stories like that involving lots of farts and lots of poorer people getting one over on the rich, which is great. And it's that same. It's I do love a good fart story. I
Me too. I think they're hilarious.
Yeah.
So you've got a couple of books in this series. What have you got there?
I've got, well, the first one I did was Tudor Tales, renamed Tudor Folk Tales, which, as I say, is nice because it's that fusion of the court records. Then I did a local one called Norfolk Folk Tales for Children, and then came Medieval Folk Tales for Children, although technically it's for adults as well, as I hope you agree.
Oh, yes.
I'm now working on another one called Trickster Tales from Many Lands, which has been a long time in the making for various reasons, but it's getting there slowly.
Amazing. So what's your process when you're putting together a collection of stories?
Well, I have to say, when it came to the first one, Tudor Tales, I was very lucky because I don't know about you, but certainly my process when I'm storytelling is to go through lots of versions of stories and work up a script. Now, I
Mm.
don't actually use that script when I'm telling, but it's in some ways it's my perfect version of the story. I use it for honing my phrases. I like to include lots of archaic speak in my stories and stuff, mixed with modern as well. And so as I then tell the story, it changes. And I would even go back and write notes on the side of my original script, how I changed it and how I'd amended it. So when it came to writing that book, I had all of these amazing notes that I
Oh,
could work.
wow.
With the others, it was a bit more difficult because although certain stories in those books I had been telling, others I hadn't. And now I always wanted my voice to come through in the stories. I wanted to write them as if I was telling, as if you were listening. And so I had to try and imagine for some of them how I would tell them, which was an interesting process. And what's interesting, since I've started telling those stories after they were written in the book, I've realized that, yeah, I didn't quite get it right. It's not a problem, but I would have told them differently because, of course, stories evolve as you tell them.
Yeah. But I mean, as a resource, they're fantastic. I really, I love that book. And particularly if I don't know, if there was a medieval fair, I would be going to that book as my first. And Jonathan, who we both know, he gave me a whole heap of medieval tales as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I would go to look for the stories as a first port of call. So I think it's a great resource for storytellers themselves.
Do you know, and it's great you say that because I must admit, I found with storytellers and audiences, they aren't just interested in the stories, they're always very interested where the stories come from. And I've
Yeah.
tried to include that in there a bit, and I like to include quite nice working in heritage, I should say. And I'm jumping here is that, they do expect you to include like site specific information and stuff like that. So I do kind of work that either into the stories or into introductions as well. And so that I've tried to include that information in the books just to help them come alive as well, just so get an idea of where the stories come from. I
Mm.
think that's a great help, really.
Yeah, no, it's good. So if you're at a historic site,
I'm curious about how you find the balance between, facts and history and the story. Like, do you do you incorporate a lot of those facts and things into the stories?
I do to a certain degree. It's one of those things you have to be careful about. I mean,
Mm,
because I worked in heritage prior to actually being a storyteller, I realize, when you're doing heritage interpretation, you don't lecture people. That's the last thing they
mm,
want. They don't want to be bamboozled with lots of facts. They do actually say in interpretation that 7 facts is enough. What you're trying to do is provide a hook. And I think the same is true in storytelling, that, less is more sometimes.
mm,
So it's just finding those nuggets. People like to know about sayings from the past. They like to know about certain job titles, those things that are going to grasp people and hopefully send them off to find out more themselves, or ask questions afterwards.
mm,
Because it's certainly as a storyteller, I don't like to rush away after I've told my stories. I like to be there in case people have questions that I can then sort of spend more time on.
mm. So do people have certain things that they're always interested in, like prostitution or something like is there something that people go back
Yeah,
to again and again?
they do. They do. I mean, that's it. I mean, one of my first ever storytelling shows that I took beyond heritage into sort of the wider storytelling world was called The Shaming of Agnes Lehman. And Agnes Lehman was just that. Lehman was her name for a courtesan, or a prostitute. And she's punished around Norwich. Certainly, she's going to be ducked in the river in a ducking stool three
Mm,
times under the water. But beforehand, because it's a shaming punishment, she's led all around the city. People are banging on pots and pans, shooting guns, striking stave against stave in order to drum up a crowd. And I did that as a tour of Norwich before I was a storyteller. So it was a natural progression that that would become a storytelling session with stories associated with women, not just in terms of prostitution, but
mm,
in terms of what I said earlier, speaking their minds, women who kind of broke beyond the traditional kind of roles. Poor men as well, I have to say, because poor men had a rough time of it too. And I can't remember where I was going with this, but yeah, certainly that's what people are interested in. And one of the things we find here when you're working in big houses, like as well as English heritage, we have the National Trust. And one of the areas that people always head to now are the kitchens, the servants' rooms, because that's where most of their ancestors were. They weren't in those big rooms with their big uncomfortable chairs and fancy furnishings. The English Heritage National Trust have learned a lot of late that that's what really people want to see,
yeah.
you know. And I think that's true when it comes to the stories. They want those connections with their past. It's not to
Mm,
say I'm interested in those bigger stories of kings and queens and what have you, the more environmental stuff. That that's all great, but they really just want to be able to connect. And
mm,
I've found more, and it's certainly something I applied to heritage interpretation as well, is that they want stuff that relates to them. So if you can make stories relatable in some way, all the
mm.
better.
Well, it's like that, the Cheddar Man, how the DNA they found that guy, and they look very similar. And he
Yeah.
lives in the same area. Like people want to know, and I want to know where my ancestors come from. It's fascinating because we don't, ordinary people don't have lists of royal lineages that go back to 500. You have
This
to
is it.
work very
Most of
hard
us,
to find it.
I mean, I've traced back my own family tree. Certainly, the Tonge side of it comes from a small village in Kent called Tonge. That's where we took our name from, and they spread out into
Mm,
the villages before some moved to Norfolk. Some were here already and from other places.
mm,
But for the most part, they were agricultural laborers, people
mm.
who lived hard lives and died and left very little marks. But it doesn't mean they weren't just as important as those people who paraded around in fancy gowns.
Yeah,
I'm only here because of them. So
yeah,
I like to celebrate them as best I can.
yeah.
There were a few rogues in there as well, I have to say, a few skeletons in the closet, which I'll be honest, I do quite like the stories about ne'er-do-wells, which probably explains why, because some of my ancestors were a little bit dodgy.
It's always good to know when you can find
With a
one.
small, let's say with a small D, nothing really bad, but they they had to get by and they found ways of getting by. And
Yeah.
again, that's replicated in lots of folk and fairy tales from long ago.
It is. Well, I've got convict ancestry, so you know what sort of people my ancestors were. So they were,
Yeah.
it was so bad they were kicked out of the country.
Well, I will say that when I was researching my family history, one guy called William Tong, he in Kent, he appears in the court records, and he's done for petty theft. Can't remember exactly what it was, but everyone else on the page, it wasn't petty theft. They'd stolen more. Everyone else on that list of people convicted was sent to Australia.
Yeah.
He was the only one who didn't, just because of the value of the goods he sold. So, you know,
Wow.
I could have been telling an Australian, or a person,
A
right?
very different experience. So,
Yeah.
have you got some really, I imagine you've had some really great experiences because I mean, do you get to go into places that other people don't when you go to heritage sites?
You know, that is one of the lovely things about it. It's the fact that not only do you get to tell on these sites, you get to stay on them a lot of the time. We often get to camp in our storytelling tent.
Wow.
On my sites, you'll probably see there's big, what we call a Burgundian style tent, so a medieval style. And often we sleep in there. I say we because sometimes I go with another storyteller called Stuart Alexander and others. And so, yeah, you get to stay on those sites when everyone else has gone home, and it's a real privilege. I mean, one that stands out is Battle Abbey. Now, Battle Abbey is the famous site of the Battle of Hastings, 1066, when William the Conqueror, conquered England. But I'll be honest, it's just a hill. It's lovely, but it's a hill. However, at night, all of a sudden the foxes come out, the barn owls come out, and all of a
Wow.
sudden you've got a battle of another sort. And
Yeah.
some of them are quite spooky. Kenilworth Castle, home of one of Elizabeth I's favourites. It's quite ominous and dark at night. They literally lock you in, it's still surrounded by a huge sort of late medieval wall. And yeah, you're in there at night and it can get a little bit spooky, but it's part of the fun of it. It's a
Yeah.
real privilege. It really
Yeah, I
is.
imagine so. And so you just sort of fell into that, but what was it that sustained you in the storytelling space within the heritage sites? What is it?
Do you know, it's really that although I fell into storytelling, it's like I suddenly found my niche. And again, I can't speak for a lot of other storytellers, but others I've talked to, often they can be quite shy. And a friend of mine says we're all shy show-offs. But when you've got a story to tell, it's the story, it's not you, it's the story. And as long as you are enjoying that story, I mean, and that's part of it. It's not just telling the story, it's the whole process of mining books for them, finding them, breaking them down and reworking them up in your own image. Because again, although I didn't do very well at school, I do love language and I enjoy that process of putting them back and mixing a bit of old and new. And also I do enjoy the kind of ab lib with audiences as well. I like storytelling to be quite free. I'm certainly not what you'd call a fully fledged performance storyteller. I do like those interactions with the crowd, and I find that they kind of respond well to that. I
Mm.
kind of say it's more sharing than performing. And yeah, that's what sustained me. It's that connection with the audience that allows me to kind of get beyond being quite shy. I mean, even now I don't like going into a room where I don't know a lot of people, if I'm honest. But when I've got a story to tell, it doesn't
Oh,
matter.
I feel so validated right now. I'm a shy person. Shy person is a show off. I love it. So, I'm definitely that. So what do you have any really special memories of those interactions with people?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that does stand out is somewhere like repeat visits to somewhere like there's a lovely, there's called the Sherwood Forest Robin Hood Festival. It used to be a week-long festival, over 20,000 visitors over the week.
Mm.
It now tends to take place of the weekends, but what was really nice is coming back year after year, seeing the same people, seeing youngsters growing up, sort of wearing their Robin Hood gear and gradually adding more to it, before they turned into sullen teens. And, it's still great though. So there's that, seeing that side of it. And just mixing with people who reminds me of just how privileged I am. They'll come up and say, oh, you're so lucky doing this. And it is nice to be reminded because sometimes it's hard, putting up that tent takes a lot of work. And sometimes you get a horrible wet summer here in England, and you're standing there just watching the trees drip and people run by. It's not as good. And putting a wet tent away, trying to fold it up is pretty grim. However, it's those interactions where people just, yeah, they remind me that it's just so good. And
Oh,
they
isn't
ask
it
great.
like, yeah, just a job where you can tell stories? What more of a perfect job could you have? It's just so great.
We have laughs as well. I mean, I remember telling one of the first times in Sherwood Forest at this big festival I mentioned, I wasn't used to traveling that much. I was a little bit of a homeboy, so I didn't really. I mean, my dad worked on a railway, so we traveled by train. I didn't really see a lot of England, and I didn't really do different dialects. And so there was a local lad. I do this story where people have to give me an idea of something worth nothing. I've done it for years. It's still one of my favorite stories. And this boy, he had a very thick Nottinghamshire accent, and he was saying a house. For some reason, he was saying house, but to me, it sounded like arse. And so we had to go backwards and forwards, house, and I was going arse, house, arse, and everyone else in the audience was loving it. It's one of those moments where again it comes down to sharing, because it doesn't matter if there's some mistakes, because again people can get on board. They can enjoy the silliness, the mistakes. They can
Yes.
become
Yeah, I love that idea of mistakes. I mean, I think one of the things that I really struggled with to begin with was, oh no, I stumbled over a word, or and then I saw Jan Blake in England and she made a mistake, and I went, Jan Blake made a mistake. It's all right for me to make a mistake. Like it was like that permission was given to feel
breaks.
like it's okay. Yeah, because if you're a perfectionist, it makes it really hard.
I mean, certainly I found that in heritage, because heritage involves of what I like to call non-storytelling audiences, storytellers or audiences that don't come to storytelling clubs and
Mm,
festivals. They can be quite nervous that,
mm,
why is this guy want to tell me stories? Story time is kids. And so it's difficult to get them even into the tent. That's the hardest part of what we do, I find. So
mm,
certainly making the odd mistakes, showing that you're human doesn't actually do any harm, because all of a sudden they relax. When they
yeah,
realize they've not just got to sit there and witness a performance,
yeah,
they are that much more relaxed.
yeah,
I mean, I actually do workshops on it now, kind of trying to get other storytellers to embrace, being themselves. Don't
yeah,
don't try too hard, enjoy
yeah.
it.
So you run workshops?
I do, yeah. I mean, I run a very nice one called Telling Heritage at the Ashmolean Museum, one of the big museums here in England. We run different versions of that, me again and Stuart Alexander, who was that storyteller I first met. I'd never heard
Yeah.
of before. We do versions for storytellers who want to work in heritage. We also work with people already working in heritage, education officers, volunteers,
Mm,
helping them tell stories. What we aim to do with that one is actually use storytelling as an interpretive tool, because of course I could just go into a heritage site or museum and tell a story that loosely relates to what,
mm,
but I can actually use those stories more to imagine what a specific object, what its life may have been, because we
mm,
don't know, because they're stuck behind glass. And of
mm,
course, the other problem we have in heritage is many of the objects that survive, they tend to be from elite culture again. So,
mm,
again, distance between us and the people of
mm,
the past. So anything we can do to help bridge that gap is
mm.
again a benefit. And
Yeah.
the other I've mentioned is called reaping what you sow. And again, it's very much trying to make yourself more human. It's a way of drawing people in and keeping them before you even start telling a story, before taking
Mm,
away some of their nerves and their "Oh, what's this all about?"
mm. So, and that's also, I guess, taking away your nerves as a teller and getting
Oh,
you in a
definitely.
space. Yeah, yeah. So, what are
Yeah.
some of the, if you don't mind sharing one or two things that you would suggest for that?
Well, it's just very simple stuff, really. I mean, I kind of like, if I'm working from my tent, and sometimes I'm in the back of my tent when people are coming, or I draw them up. If I if I'm if I'm already there, I might come out and just make a simple joke about, oh, what's going on here? Is someone telling a story? Who is it? It can be as simple as that. Or
Yeah.
when I'm dropping up a crowd, I'll call out, something like, come and hear some stories, um, you know, um, tall tales of high adventure, small tales of low cunning, tales of about my height, 7'4", walked a long way to get here, and I've worn my feet away, silly stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's of the moment. It's silly cracks, just to make people realize that what they're seeing isn't all serious. There will be some serious stories in there,
Yeah.
but you tend to kind of sugar the pill first, get them
Yes.
in and earn the audience. That's the whole point, earn them. And once I've earned them, I can then tell those stories that are a little bit more meaty.
Yeah, great. Oh, I like that idea. So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. What do you think is at the heart of storytelling?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, well, if I said the storyteller, that would sound a bit ego-led. It's the connection between the storyteller and their audience. It's that. And again, it comes back to that idea of earning your audience, that's where we start. You want them. I think, that's the difference between people saying, oh, that was good and that was great,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
they feel that they know you and that you
Mm.
know them. I mean, I freely admit that when I first started telling when I was a younger man, I did kind of used to linger with my eyes and flirt a little bit because and I mean that in a nice way, and not just with women, but with men as well, just that it is, you just that making people believe or feel that they are part of the experience. So
Mm.
that was the one answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely answer. I really like that. And so, I mean, today people are very technological heavy. Do that, and I guess people still go to heritage sites in England a fair bit. But
Yeah.
why do you think we still need the oral tradition as part of both heritage and just storytelling in general?
Um, I think even more we need it because I think especially now certainly with online you get a lot of nonsense mentioned about heritage and stuff, and all kinds of bizarre things about where stories come from. So that whole kind of face-to-face interaction, whether it be storytelling or any other kind of performance, really is a way of connecting with people and actually encouraging them to use their critical skills, rather than
Mm,
just take. Because when we watch online, when we read and research online, we tend to kind of just take everything at face value.
mm,
Whereas, I think what's nice about the storytelling is that there is that backwards and forwards, there is that constant interaction. I tell stories that I don't necessarily agree with, but I like to show both sides of an argument, which I think you can do through story.
mm.
Whereas again, you don't have that flexibility when you're not talking face to face with someone.
Mm. I'd never considered
And
that critical thinking aspect of what storytelling can offer.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't load my stories with lots of messages. I like the stories to do the work themselves, but I have my own political views and stuff, and occasionally, of course, that creeps through in my stories. However, again, if people want to challenge me on what I say, I'm quite happy to chat about it afterwards.
yeah.
So
So
that's part of that.
do you get heckled much? Is it something that you welcome?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, within reason. Yeah. I try and some of it's when I say, heckling, it can be kind of unconsciously done. People will say something, children especially, they'll correct me on my pronunciation of say, I used to say Tudors, and this young woman said, it's Tudors, like that. And so I included that in the rest of the story, Tudors, in a nice way, so she didn't feel kind of picked on. So yeah, I welcome it because often you can integrate it into the story. It can become part of that sharing. So yeah, heckling is good, a little bit anyway.
So have you got, I've never been, I mean, with children, I'm okay because I've had a lot of experience, but, have you got any tips for dealing with people who are throwing things at you while you're in the story?
Not so much throwing people. There are those people, there is that sad thing that sometimes, and again, I'm sure you've experienced that when they come along, they will maybe put their children in front of you and then disengage and start nattering. And, it was just one of those things that people did. It's not so much now. And certainly Stuart and I used to kind of, because there were two of us together, we could kind of have conversations that we pretended were between us, but others were meant to hear as well. So perhaps dropping a hint, because other people in the audience wouldn't like this either. And
Mm,
and sometimes we would include, say, a scolding man, or in if he was talking too loud in the story. And just, it's finding ways of picking on people with a small p, because it's not that they're particularly bad or
yeah.
in just, they're just a little bit thoughtless in this modern world we live in. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's mainly encouraging, or rather, excuse me, including them in the stories, perhaps.
Oh,
Is
that's a great idea. I like
yeah,
that. So with
I never,
Stuart,
yeah.
yeah. So do you tell together?
We used to a lot. We don't do very much anymore, but it was certainly lovely because the banter between us was just as important again as the stories. I now work with a musician, a period musician, and again, we mock each other mercilessly. Again, it's something that I suppose you'd call it that kind of factory workplace mentality. I used to do it when I was a welder. You had to give as good as you get. And of course, most people, they love that. They love seeing that between us. And sometimes they'll not join in. I mean, you certainly don't get people shouting abuse or throwing things, but they'll give daft answers. If I ask a question, they'll say something they know will throw you or try and throw you. So it becomes a challenge to kind of use that and find a way back.
Amazing. So do you have any advice for storytellers who might be just starting out and wanting to work in heritage and um or storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the top tip is to certainly find stories that you love, and just
Mm,
don't be tempted to get too many to start with. I mean, I certainly find when people come to storytelling clubs, there's a temptation to find a new story every week to
mm,
tell. But I think the stories are best when you own them, when you've told them. They're like an old pair of jeans. The more you wear them, the more you tell them, the more comfortable
mm,
they. So find one story you really love and tell it until you're bored with it, and then put it aside and do that, and then come back to them. Just
yeah.
build up slowly, and don't be drawn or tempted to tell worthy stories until you're ready for them. Just because you
Mm,
think you. I mean, there's stories I tell now that I wouldn't have dreamt of telling when I first started out. That
mm,
are more grown up, sad stories. I love my irreverent stories, and I still tell them. But now I like to tell those more thoughtful stories that I certainly didn't think I was capable of when I
mm,
first started. Because it's getting that balance in those stories, like a roller coaster of telling the highs and the lows, getting the
mm,
balance.
mm. Can you talk more about that for me? Just
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it's that kind of. I mean, I tend to break the fourth wall when I'm telling stories quite a lot, and that's my way, especially if I'm telling a darker tale. And there are those tales like Wayland the Smith, those ancient tales that involve rape and other things, and it's obviously the older you are, the easier you can find your way of saying things
Mm,
without,
mm,
but also of using ways like breaking the fourth wall just to kind of release the tension before
mm,
you then kind of build up the tension again. Now, it might be
mm,
breaking the fourth wall, it might just be a simple comment that just allows people to go and breathe before they go. It comes back to that idea that people don't want to be lectured. Ultimately, what we do, even if we are educating people, our primary goal, as far as I'm concerned, is still to entertain. Doesn't mean that the two can't work together. They're not mutually exclusive.
mm,
It's just finding that way of lightening the load. And when
mm,
I first started telling, I was so into getting laughs that I would have probably overdone the laughs and killed the heavier, or rather the more worthy, does that make sense? Part of the story off by
mm.
trying to joke too much. But
Yeah.
now as an older man, I kind of feel I've got the balance more.
Yeah, great. So you've had quite an interesting career by the sounds of it, and been lots of really cool places. I'm very envious of English heritage and what you've got there, because we don't have anything like that here in Australia. Um, and yeah, the options for telling historical stories are quite limited here for a non-Indigenous person. So yeah, I really, really appreciate your knowledge and wisdom. So just to finish off, where can people find you and learn more about the work that you do?
Well, I'm on Instagram, which is new to me. I've finally got, I mean, I'm supposed to be working on a new website and I will. It all crashed and burnt during COVID. But I will get a diary page up on there. But I'm still on Facebook, but on Instagram is where I'm really pushing what I'm doing. Like I'm back at Rochester Castle down in Kent, which is lovely for me and my family homeland. I should be spending the whole of half term there, not just telling Halloween tales, which of course are a big part now, of what we do, but medieval tales as well. And I've got a lovely event called Fire and Feast where I'm telling Gawain and the Green Knight. It's a farm in Suffolk, not far from me, where people can eat meat that's actually raised on the farm and be very medieval. We're not dressing up as medieval, but still there's that medieval feel, feasting and enjoying a story as well.
Yeah,
But yeah,
beautiful.
Instagram is where I'm at the minute, which obviously I think I sent the details through. So.
Yeah, great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Dave. I've learned a lot. I think this has been a really, really great chat, and I hope that one day I can come to England and do one of your heritage courses, because that sounds fabulous.
Come and stay here in Norfolk. We have room. You would be more than welcome. Trust me.
It sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It really has. I've enjoyed it.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairy tale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alissacurtain.com or at Alissa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.